itself. Darwin is wrong and the Bible is right. And I hope by the end of it, not only you'll be 110% convinced of that, but also that you ideally have the tools to go and convince other people of that. We're dealing with modern people, so the order that you approach this stuff in is not necessarily the logical order. A lot of evolution is taught using icons and using kind of emotional appeals and that sort of thing. All right, we're going to look. In fact, I have a next slide, please. Next slide. Alrighty, that's it. Yeah. So part 2A then. This is the long one. Very quick recap. Although I've sort of done some of that over there with some of you while we were just waiting there. Then we're going to look at the flood. Then we're going to look at Noah's Ark, and then we're going to look at dinosaurs. And then we'll have a break, and then finally we'll look at the consequences and the implications of evolution one way or the other. If it's right, there are implications. If it's wrong, there are also implications. In politics, in morals, you name it, everything, economics, everything, and finally religion. All right? Jolly good. Right, let's dive in. So, next slide, please. This is, very quick recap. The time scale is unscientific and untrue. The billions and squillions and gazillions of years can't be proved, and in fact it's very easy to prove the opposite. Okay? And besides, they shouldn't need that. But they feel they do need that, so we can undermine it very easily. Okay. Evidence of a young Earth is all over the place. Those of you who were here last time will remember we discussed limiting factors. If you find a treasure chest, the date on which the coin was minted, the latest date, it means it can't be any earlier than that, right? So there are limiting factors in the age of the Earth. Most of them are in the order of magnitude, not of billions of years, not even millions of years, not even tens of thousands of years. We are talking thousands of years old for the Earth. And in fact for the solar system as well. There's loads of stuff I haven't even included, I didn't mention last time. The planets in our solar system that have very strong magnetic cores, and if the solar system were there billions of years, they should be long gone. Magnetism runs down over time. Every single planet in our solar system, when they sent a probe there beforehand, the evolutionists predicted, oh no, you're not going to find any magnetic core. And they found very strong magnetic cores. They also predicted they're all going to spin the same direction, they're all going to spin in the same plane, because of course the Big Bang is how they got there. And they find, guess what, some of them spin backwards, some of them are spinning that way, they're not even spinning in the right plane. And so, there's loads of stuff out there, but of course we would be here all day if I showed you that. Go and have a look at it. Alright. Here we go. So, yes, we looked at that last time. These layers, if we are to believe what the evolutionists tell us, each of those layers was laid down very slowly over millions of years, and yet they fold over, they fold backwards. Layers of dirt don't fall upwards. Okay? I think it's fairly clear just from a glance at this, and those two are from different parts of the world, by the way. Those layers were all laid down all at once. It's self-evident. You just look at it and you say, that's, I don't know, liquid mud, sediment, something like that, and it hardened into rock over the centuries, but it was laid down all in one go. Polystrate fossils, these are tree trunks, usually minus the branches, minus the roots, sometimes upside down. But what do they all have in common? They are all vertical. If each layer took a very long time to form, you would expect them to be lying down horizontally. They're not. They're vertical, and they join all of the layers, and the top layer is supposedly millions of years younger than the bottom layer. Well, that tree won't stand up for millions of years waiting to fall over while the layers form around it. It would rot away or it would fall over. And yet you see them all over the world. Sometimes there's a layer of coal, and the tree trunk has turned to coal while it runs through that layer. Okay? All over the world you find that. Now that suggests, to my mind, a global flood. Well, it suggests a flood, doesn't it? Because you have lots of huge, vast layers of sediment being deposited in one go, and the fact that it's all over the world means it's a global flood, not a regional flood. Okay? This was a coin where the date you can just about see is 1744. There it is. And it was a ship that sank off the coast of South Africa, and the rock has now encased it. So the rock doesn't take millions of years to form. Stalactites I showed you under the Lincoln Memorial, remember that last time? Yes, by the 1920s they were there, and the thing was only built, by the 1940s they were there, and the thing was only built in about 1920 they finished it off. So a couple of decades is enough to turn something to stone. Okay, doesn't take millions of years. Right, next thingamabob. Right, the fossil record doesn't exist. This phrase is used again and again, and they use mind games and they use trickery on you. Don't fall for it. There is no such thing as a fossil record. There are fossils. That's the fact. That they constitute a record is the interpretation. There is no such thing as the fossil record. Oh, you don't believe in the fossils? I accept the fossils, but I don't accept that they constitute a record. They don't. Okay, those are dead organisms that were buried. Now, that's all we know for a fact. However, fossilised jellyfish, fossilised octopus, the carcass rots away very quickly. There's no bone, there's no exoskeleton, there's only soft flesh. There is jelly and there's nothing else. Okay? And those of you who've seen a jellyfish get washed up on the beach will know that it takes just a few days and it's completely gone. It will rot away. Soft tissue and nothing else. And yet there they are, preserved in mint condition. Looks like it's even swimming through the sea. Okay? So it was, as it were, killed in mid-flight. And fish eating other fish. This is just what I found after a couple of minutes of Google search. Not very difficult to find. There are, needless to say, there's going to be plenty more where that came from. A fish halfway through eating its dinner. That didn't die of old age, did it? Didn't die of old age, okay? It got killed in some great cataclysm that it didn't see coming. This fish is in the middle of giving birth to another fish. And we have fossilised hammers and fossilised 1-inch screw. What was their explanation for that? Does anybody remember?
Aliens.
Aliens left it behind. Yeah, interesting that the aliens also used inches, because it's exactly an inch long. The other explanation was, oh no, it's not really a screw, it's a sea creature, because it has these little ridges. They said it was a crinoid, but it's got this little bolt head on it. It's a 300 million year old screw, and the one explanation that never occurred to them for 1 second is maybe we've got the age of the rock wrong. Maybe that rock isn't 300 million years old. That you can't even think that, because once you think that, the whole geological column comes into question, and that means the millions of years timeline is now in question, and that means the age of the earth is in question, and that means evolution is in question, and that means maybe the Bible was right about one or two things, which in turn means that God exists, which in turn means I'd better stop living my moral life. In the end, that's what it all comes down to, one suspects. But that's not to say there aren't many other unsuspecting people who are taken in by this. Right, old Earth. I just came across this, 1 or 2 little quick examples since last time. This is an entire school of fish that was fossilised. Now, did every single one of those fish die of old age at exactly the same time whilst keeping in formation, or were they all killed in one go? This is from 2019, this is 3 years ago, this article, okay? So the fossils are a fact, the fossil record is a fiction. Who says that those fossils constitute a record? That's what we need to dispute. Those fossils are not a record. Right, next slide, please. This is very recent, so I included it. June 2022. It's 2 turtles who are, I guess, mating. They're making baby turtles, and they both died in that position. Again, they didn't die of old age, did they? But it turns out, and I looked into this, and I kept finding more and more of these examples. Next. There we go. That's February 2015. Can you see it's not exactly the same turtles, and they're in slightly different, but it's pretty much the same sort of thing. This is 2012. Same thing. Next slide. And it turns out this is creation.com, which is a pretty good website. They're the ones I recommended the magazine. Do you know what? I should have brought some of the magazines along to show you. They're a Protestant bunch, but they bring out a monthly magazine that's actually reasonably good. Their article on their website, turtles fossilised while mating. It wasn't just one aquatic turtle pair that had been found, but 9 of them. Now, what are the odds? What are the odds, first of all, of even finding 1 pair? But 9 pairs found a few years apart, 2012, 2015, 2019, 2020, they keep coming across this. They keep finding mating turtles. Yes? Right, next slide. So, evidence for the young Earth, we talked about limiting factors. Next. The salt content of the ocean. Okay, the oceans are getting slightly saltier over time because the water evaporates, and it's pure water that is evaporating and taken off into the clouds. Well, it leaves the rock salt behind. The rock salt, of course, gets washed in by the rivers. So what happens is the rock salt goes in, the pure water gets distilled out by the clouds, and then it rains pure water, and then it runs into the rivers and washes more rock salt in. So the oceans are getting saltier and saltier over time. They are nowhere near salty enough to be, it would be like the Dead Sea. If the Earth were really 4.5 billion years old, then all the oceans in the world would be like the Dead Sea and you would just float. They're not, because they've not been around anything like long enough. When God made the Earth, I think, I don't know for certain, and this isn't day for day, but I would imagine probably there was no salt water and everything was fresh water. And I did mention before, salt water and freshwater versions of the same animal can be, you can turn salt water into freshwater animals, and you can turn freshwater into saltwater, crocodiles and fish and so on. You very slightly change, very gradually, the content of the water over time. You either lower the salt or raise the salt, and they adapt to it. Okay. The moon is getting slowly further away from us. If the Earth were 4.5 billion years old, it couldn't possibly, it would have been too close. The tides alone would have just destroyed everything. The sun is shrinking. I don't think I included this last time, but obviously the sun is burning up. It's turning hydrogen into helium. So it's only got a limited lifespan. Right? There's not an infinite amount of hydrogen to be turned into helium. So it's shrinking. Well, you run that backwards 4.5 billion years ago, the sun would have been way too big and way too close, even a few million years ago. So things can't have been around for that long. The solar system is young as well as the Earth. The Earth's declining magnetic field, I think we talked about. It is running down. Their kind of get-out clause for that is to say, oh no, what's really happening is the polarity is going to reverse, because the polarity of the Earth reverses every 100 million years, but there's no evidence for that at all. That's just a kind of rescuing device. In fact, it's just running down and that's it. On one day there'll be no magnetism left. The magnetic field, by the way, is very useful. It protects us from cosmic rays and so forth. And if it was stronger earlier on, and it was, then we would have less harmful effects from the sun's rays. Probably, I don't know, but probably cancer, things like that. Okay. Comets, mostly ice, and when they go past the sun, that burns off in gas. That's why you have a tail. That's the only reason we can see them. If it was just a solid lump of ice, we wouldn't be able to see it. But as it passes by the sun, it burns off. You have this tail behind it. And obviously, there's a limited amount of ice, and a few times round the sun, however big the orbit is, and it's gone. Now they claim there's an infinite comet generator just out of sight, just out of where we can detect it. It's called the Oort cloud, after the man who dreamt it up. And the only evidence that it exists is that if it didn't, we've got a problem, because after 4.5 billion years there shouldn't be comets anymore, and there still are. So there's an Oort cloud. That's not scientific, I'm sorry. That's just fairy tales. Right, dinosaur soft tissue is an entire rabbit warren, and it still to this day amazes me that people don't talk about the fact that a T-Rex thigh bone that's supposedly a fossil, in fact they found it was only the outer part that had fossilised, and inside you had soft tissue, you had blood vessels, and you had even red blood cells inside the blood vessels, and that therefore cannot possibly be 65 million years old. It wouldn't last that long. Carbon-14. I mentioned about the flaws using carbon dating. Did you know that they never use carbon dating on coal, ever? They will never use carbon dating on fossils. Have a guess why not? Why do you think they don't use carbon-14 on fossils or on coal, Anton?
Because if they were to use carbon dating on fossils, coal and diamonds, it would show that it was formed at a much later date than they would like to
got it exactly.
postulate.
That's exactly it. If they are correct, there shouldn't be any carbon-14 in coal. It should be, it has a radioactive half-life of 5,700 years. Right? So if it was 4 million years ago, there's going to be none left. It'll be long gone. But every time they do carbon-14 dating on fossils and on coal, guess what? First of all, there is carbon-14 left. And secondly, the result is, oh, it's actually quite young. And they originally, when that happened, they said, oh, well, it must have been contaminated. But then they found with diamonds, they get the same result. And a diamond can't really be contaminated because it's so hard, you can't get another substance going into it. Right? So that's a whole thing that just gets swept under the rug. Right. Again, don't take my word for it. Do go away and have a look at this. You'll see that what I'm telling you is the truth. Next, please. I also mentioned about textbooks. Being a nosy Parker, I found a few textbooks, school textbooks. I won't say where I found them, but I took a few pictures. This is 8 means year 8, which I would call second form. Exploring science, working scientifically. And here's a picture of Archaeopteryx, and it says, a fossil of Archaeopteryx, one of the first birds which lived around 150 million years ago. Notice, by the way, it's not archaeologists believe that, scientists claim that, many people believe that. No, it's just a fact. It lived 150. Now, I put it to you, if you go and have a look in an RE textbook, and they represent, let's say, Catholic teaching on, I don't know, transubstantiation or the resurrection or you name it, the Immaculate Conception, they're going to start with 3 words. They always do. Catholics believe that. Now, it's not saying it, but what does it subtly imply? They believe that. We, of course, know better. They never do that with this. They just say it's a fact. It lived 150 million years ago. Well, I think we mentioned before, Archaeopteryx, first of all, it's not a dinosaur, it's just a bird. And secondly, it's supposed to be the ancient ancestor of birds, but it's found in layers above birds, modern birds. Now, those layers don't mean anything, we know that, but they believe in the layers. They believe that the layers are like looking back in time. Well, you have birds, you have Archaeopteryx up here and birds down there, so it can't possibly, by their logic, be anything ancient. Right. This is, can anybody see what that is there? It's our old friend, the peppered moth. The more I think about this, the stupider it is. I told you the real story behind it, how the guy glued them onto the tree. Moths don't come out during daylight. They're nocturnal and they only come out at night. Okay, if it's late at night and it's dark outside and you have the light on in your house and you have the window open, you'll get moths flying in. During the day, you can open the window, because moths don't fly in during the day, because they only come out at night. We all know that, but when it's presented in a textbook, it never occurs to one to stop and think, hold on a minute, why is there a photo of them in broad day? And 2 of them, both with their wings open, right next to each other, on the trunk of a tree, in broad daylight. What are the odds? He must have been very lucky when he took that pic. And one happens to be white and one happens to be black. Wow, what a lucky shot that photo was. It's staged. He glued them to the tree. Complete, utter non... And then claimed some ratio of 95% were, I forget, like, what's 95% of 2? Please. Sometimes it's gibberish, but sometimes it's actually fraudulent. Okay, that's not just silly, that's fraudulent. He's lying about that. Okay, right. On we go. Right, so the flood. Let's talk about the flood. We've already sort of touched on it because, of course, those layers were deposited in a worldwide flood. But there is more evidence of a worldwide flood. This is an ammonite, it's a marine creature. There's a ruler on the bottom to give you some idea of the scale. It's going to be sort of something that size. All right? It's fossilised. I mean, it's not it's stone that's fossilised into the shape of what was there. But what's interesting is it's found near the summit of Mount Everest. Not at the very top, but quite near the top. It's a long way up. And it's not just one thing, there's loads of them. Here, this is from a different website, I forget. Grainstone with skeletal grains of trilobite, crinoid, that's the one they claimed that was the screw, remember? It's a marine creature. And it's... yeah, that black bar there is 1 millimetre, but there's all sorts of them all over. You can't really see because of the resolution of the projector, I'm afraid. But they are all over, embedded into rock, and these are from near the top of Mount Everest. Now, how did they get there? Well, I know how they got there. 6,000 years ago, God made everything, and 4,400 years ago, give or take, there was a worldwide flood. And before the flood, the geography of the Earth was very different. A worldwide flood is going to change a lot of things. Probably the atmosphere even changed, I think. But definitely the geography changed. The mountains got higher and the oceans got deeper. And after the flood, the waters of the flood ran off from the mountains and into the oceans. So all the water from the flood, when it covered the entire Earth underwater, oh yeah, somebody's calling me. All of that water is still there today. And the reason, the explanation for how they got up all these marine creatures near the top of Mount Everest is that, first of all, Mount Everest wasn't as high, well, no, it didn't exist, but that piece of rock wasn't as high up to begin with. And also, it was underwater once upon a time, not all that long ago either. Next slide, please. This is Mount Diablo in California. 3,800 foot above sea level is not as high, but it's still impressively high if you're going to claim. Can you see these are just normal seashells like you would find on the beach? What you maybe can't see is that this isn't sand, it's rock. And they're embedded into it. How did they get up there? Did they crawl all the way up and then die? Right, next slide. This is Peru in the Andes. 12,300, this is about 2 miles above sea level. 2 miles up.
More than 2 miles.
More than 2 miles, yeah. Now, at a glance it looks like rocks, but in fact those are clams, the Americans would call them. They're like oyster shells. And in fact here, where the chap is lying across one to give you an idea of scale, if you look at the kind of up and down line between the two halves, you can see that that's what that is. Now those are giant, you never find anything even approaching that big today. But they're all the way up there. Also worth noting about mussels, clams, oysters, is that the mussel keeps the shell closed. When it dies, it opens out. That's why when you find when you find the remains of them on the beach, usually you find only one half. Right? When they die, they open out. If they died closed, that means they died very suddenly and unexpectedly. All of those did. And they died 2 miles up in the air or something, 12,800 foot up. How did they get there? Who knows? Maybe aliens did it. Right, next slide. So that's California, Peru, Himalayas. There are other examples, but that's 3 mountain ranges in different parts of the world. I think it's fair to say it's worldwide, it's a flood. Okay? Right, here we are. These, I hope, will be interesting to you because, and I've only included a selection. There are plenty more where this came from. These are ancient flood myths, folklore stories, name it what you will, but then you find them all over the world in every different language and culture. There are at least, I think, 150, 200, maybe 250 of them. I've got about 10 here for you, just to make the point. This is Hawaii. So in Hawaiian, there's this story about mankind had turned to evil, so Kane, the creator god, decided to punish their sin with a great flood. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Nu'u and his wife and 3 sons were saved by climbing aboard the great canoe. So there's this man called Nu'u who has 3 sons, and they're the only ones who are righteous, so they build the great canoe. It's a canoe which is roofed over like a house, which had been given to them by Kane. Nu'u put all the animals into the great canoe, and thus they escaped the great flood. After the canoe came to rest on dry land at the end of the flood, Nu'u mistakenly attributed his safety to the moon and made sacrifices to it. Kane, the creator god, then descended to earth on a rainbow and explained Nu'u's mistake, but left the rainbow as a perpetual sign of his forgiveness. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Next slide. I just thought I'd give you an idea of where Hawaii is in relation to the rest of the earth. That's the Pacific Ocean there. It's not really near anywhere. So let somebody try and say, oh yes, they got hold of, you know, I don't know, they must have communicated with the ancient Hebrews and they must have got their story off them. Really? How's that possible? They sail all the way out to Palestine and back. 9,000 miles away. Right. Ancient Chinese flood myths, I haven't included them here because there's so many. There's a lot. Again, have a look out there on the internet. Okay, the oldest stories are about a great deluge. Okay. This is Wikipedia, which you'll remember last time those of you were here, I said, and again you'll see this for yourself, is evangelically atheist. Evangelically evolutionist. But if they admit this, all the mythological themes in ancient Chinese, the earliest and so far most pervasive, is about a flood. It's concerning a flood, says Wikipedia. Right, these stories contain the following themes. The flood wiped out all humans over the world. A pair of survivors are saved by the gods because of their upright life. And after the flood, the survivors repopulate the world. What a coincidence. Next slide. This is, I'm not an expert in Chinese, and I understand there are different versions of Chinese, but the one or two creationist websites carry this sort of information, and it is interesting. As far as I'm aware, it's true. The Chinese language is pictographic, so you don't spell words by constructing them of letters. It's like each letter is a word, but you make other words by putting other words together, right? So a boat, the symbol for a boat is vessel, 8, and people. 8 mouth, that means a mouth, but 8 mouths means 8 people. So a vessel with 8 people is the word for a boat. And the flood, together earth and 8 and water is the symbol for a flood. Again, go and have a look at it. I think that's really quite extraordinary, and it's consistent with all of these ancient Chinese flood myths. There we go. What are the odds? Right. Next slide, please. Some of you will be familiar with this. This is Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, and Zeus decides to wipe everybody out in a flood. And I think Prometheus is the one who tips them off, and they build a giant wooden box, and it comes to rest on top of Mount Parnassus. Okay, so the details are it's what you would expect with a story that's been handed down over hundreds or even a couple of thousand years. It's going to grow legs, isn't it? It's like Chinese whispers, so to speak. The stories are going to vary, but the essential things, you're going to find common themes running through them, okay? And this is a bit weird because then they repopulate the world by throwing stones over their shoulders. I don't know what that's all about, but anyway, right, next slide please. Deucalion, Epic of Gilgamesh. Yeah, I'm not going to try and pronounce some of those names. He had some craftsmen build a large boat, 1 acre in area, 7 decks. He loaded it with his family, craftsmen, and the seeds of all living creatures. The waters of the abyss rose up and it rained for 6 days. Even the gods were frightened by the flood's fury. Other than the Bible, I think this is the oldest piece of literature, isn't it? The Epic of Gilgamesh. It's older than the Iliad and the Odyssey. Yeah. Next slide, please. This is one of my favourites. The Lake of Leon burst, flooding all the lands. Dwyfan and his wife Dwyfach escaped in a mastless... I'm not going to try doing it. Escaped in a mastless ship in which they took a pair of every sort of living creature. Once the flood ended, their boat landed on Prithdan. And from there they repopulated the world. Next slide. Right, the Maasai tribe. Tumbainot is this chap. Everybody turns to evil and they're murdering each other, and he's the only righteous one, so he takes his wife and his sons. And because everybody's so evil, they're murdering each other, God resolved to destroy mankind, except for Tumbainot, who found grace in his eyes. God commanded him to build an ark of wood and enter it with his 2 wives, 6 sons and their wives, some of the animals of every sort. When they were aboard and provisioned, God caused a great long rain, which caused a flood, and other men and beasts drowned. The ark drifted for a long time, and provisions began to run low. Then the rain finally stopped, and Tumbainot let loose a dove to ascertain the state of the flood. The dove returned tired, so he knew it had found no place to rest. Several days later he loosed a vulture, but he first attached an arrow to one of its tail feathers so that if the bird landed, the arrow would hook onto something and be lost. And the vulture returns without the arrow, so he says it must have landed on some carrion or something. Okay. Kind of similarities, I suppose. Yeah. Ecuador in South America, the Jivaros are descended from the one man and his 2 sons who were saved. Yeah, when the flood came along. Peru, the Guanca and Chiquitos. Long ago, before there were any Incas, the country was populous, but the ocean broke out of its bounds and the land was covered and the people perished. Some say that a few people survived in the caves of the highest mountains. Others say that only 6 people survived on a float. The Inca have a flood story. A man and woman who floated in a box. Okay? and then the Creator repopulates the earth by moulding people from clay. I mean, that might be a little bit of mixing things up with Adam and Eve, because of course Adam was made from the slime of the earth. But yeah, just interesting that it's. This is the North America, the USA, the Mandan and the Cascade Mountains and the Skagit tribe. Let's not read all of them, but yeah, let's have a look. Yeah, okay. A man and a woman survived on a raft on which they collected all kinds of animals and birds. So it's not a box in that story, it's a raft. Same sort of thing. Right, next slide. Okay. So that's, I think, as far as the flood goes. And look, I must emphasise this. I'm giving you a taste. If you've got about 200 flood stories out there, from all different peoples and languages and cultures all over the world, remote places like Hawaii, I think it's without any doubt that there must have been a global flood at some point. I just don't see any way around that. And the geological evidence is all there. It all points to a flood, not millions of years. Now, most people will dismiss the flood because it's in the Bible, but that's irrational. They are guilty of fallacious thinking. The fact that something is in the Bible doesn't mean it therefore automatically is not true. Even if their argument is, well, we're not going to just believe it only because it's in the Bible, fine. It's not resting on the fact that it's in the Bible, it's resting on the evidence that's out there for it. As it happens, the evidence points towards the very thing that is included in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, a worldwide flood. Okay? Right, Noah's Ark then. If the flood is true, Noah's Ark has to have been true because obviously somebody survived. That's the key part of it. And we're here today, so clearly somebody did survive if there were a worldwide flood. Right. These are three common arguments against Noah's Ark. If you talk to a normal secular modern person, they'll say, how could Noah possibly have fit all the animals on an ark that size? And modern people in their arrogance, usually you find, I suppose it's not entirely their fault, but if you probe a little deeper, you'll find they really don't know what they're talking about. And they heard someone else use that argument, which is why they're using it. So the first thing you want to say is, well, what size was Noah's Ark? And normally they don't know. Okay, we don't know exactly, but we have a pretty good idea. What size was Noah's Ark? I don't know, but it couldn't have been big enough to fit all those animals on. What's the second question then? Well, how many animals were there that had to go on? Again, usually they don't know, and it'll be how many animals, I don't know, but too many to fit on an ark that size. So it's circular. But you kind of want to answer both of those questions and show that in fact it is possible. Right, does anybody, well, before we get to it, what size was the ark, how many animals? Yeah, alright, let's go on. Does anybody know roughly what size the ark was? Most people, they encounter Noah's Ark as a child in a little children's book, and it's something along the lines of this. Okay, that's usually what it looks like, right? You get animals. When you think about all the animals that exist in the world, there's always elephants in these little children's pictures. There's always a pair of elephants, right? There's always a pair of giraffes. They usually have their heads sticking out the window or something. They're always fully grown. They're mostly, it's always somehow just African animals, which is kind of odd when you think about it. Like, where's the sheep and cows and, I don't know. But that's usually, I know it's silly, but it's worth pointing it out. That is what most people have in their mind, because they encounter the idea of Noah's Ark as a child, and of course never again in adult life do they even think about it seriously. So that is the only image they have in their life, in their mind, sorry. Right. Here we go, next slide. That's a similar one, yeah, there you go. Notice they're all really joyful and happy, even though they've just witnessed the entire earth being destroyed and everybody dying. They're all really cheerful. Okay, next slide. Yeah, okay, there we go. So, yeah. I think if you're going to make this argument properly, you need to kind of strip that idea out of, first of all, your own mind and other people's mind as well, and try and turn it into something that's a really serious thing that actually existed. Right, here we go. So there's our measurements. This is Genesis. Thou shalt pitch it within and without, and thou shalt make it, the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth 50 cubits, and the height 30 cubits. Now a cubit is fingertip to elbow, right? That's a cubit. Well, obviously that varies according to how tall you are. I'm 6 foot. It's going to be about 18 inches, something like that. Okay? We know that in Old Testament times they used a royal cubit. There's different cubits for different. I think the Babylonians had a different cubit to the one that the Hebrews had, and I think the Egyptians used this thing called a royal cubit, which is slightly longer. It's 20 and a half, 21 inches. Okay, and also, lest I forget, Solomon's temple, I think, was built using royal cubits. So there is a pretty good, and why? I think it's reasonable. You could say that in all likelihood, maybe the ark was built of royal cubits. But even the lowest measurement, let's say 18 inches, times 350, 30, that's going to give you 450 feet by 75 feet by 45 feet, which is a 6-to-1 ratio length to width, so it's not too long and skinny, it's not too kind of broad and wide. Yeah, pitch it within and without, that means kind of tar it, varnish it, seal it up. Yeah. Okay. Is it, in fact, let's go back one, because I think, sorry if, I don't want to try your patience, but I think it is worth us just reading this through properly. Thou shalt make a window in the ark, and a cubit, and in a cubit shalt thou finish the top of it, and the door of the ark thou shalt set in the side, with lower, middle chambers, and third stories shalt thou make it. So there are 3 stories, and there's a window at the top, which some people think kind of goes all the way around, because they say a cubit high, but he doesn't say how wide. So maybe there's kind of an opening in the top that goes all the way around, something like that. Okay? Behold, I will bring the waters of a great flood upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. So he's not. The breath of life seems to suggest breathing oxygen, so that means not fish, not bacteria, maybe not insects or birds, I'm not sure, but definitely land animals that breathe air, yes. He's going to destroy all flesh wherein is the breath of life under heaven. All things that are in the earth shall be consumed, and I will establish my covenant with thee, and thou shalt enter into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife, and the wives of thy sons with thee. So 8 people. Mr. and Mrs. Noah, Mr. and Mrs. Ham, Mr. and Mrs. Sem, and Mr. and Mrs. Japheth. 8 people. And of every living creature of all flesh, thou shalt bring 2 of a sort into the ark, that they may live with thee, of the male sex and the female, of the fowls according to their kind, and beasts in their kind, and of everything that creepeth on the earth according to its kind. Well, fowl suggests birds, but it doesn't suggest little birds, it suggests sort of, I guess, things like pheasant and partridge, or whatever the ancient equivalent ancestor was of chickens. There's something like, how many breeds of chickens in the world today? A few hundred at least. Well, they probably had an ancient ancestor which was a chicken, and probably 2 chickens on Noah's Ark. Yeah. Anyway, so 2 of each, they're going to go in with thee, that they may live. So the idea is, you're going to save them. You're going to save specimens of each, so that they can repopulate the earth afterwards. Okay? Yeah, right, next slide. Okay, here we go. So this is interesting. This is in Kentucky, where I've been several times, although I'm ashamed to say I've never been to this. The days when I used to visit Kentucky regularly are over, I'm afraid. But between about 2013, 14 and about maybe 2018, I used to once in a while go there. And this was just down the road, although it only opened in 2016. This is, I forget what the name of the organisation is, but it's led by a chap called Ken Ham, who is one of these biblical Protestant creationists. And the theme park is called Ark Encounter. They built a life-size replica using those dimensions. Anton?
I believe Ken Ham is the head of Answers in Genesis.
Answers in Genesis, thank you very much, well remembered. Answers in Genesis is his organisation, and they're pretty good. Right? You can find videos of them on YouTube. I'd say maybe a bit more gentle and not as hard-hitting as Kent Hovind, also less evangelically propped, but in some ways that's a nice change. No, you have too much of a good thing. But anyway, there you go. So, very interesting. They've incorporated a few design features in this. There's this sort of, it's not actually a rudder because it doesn't move. I'll show you in a minute. That's to kind of keep it stable in the water, and they've got a big thing at the front. where it's going to catch the wind and it's going to turn it into the wind, and this thing at the back is going to keep it stable. Now, there's always going to be an objection when somebody builds a life-size replica of the ark. Well, how do you know it looked exactly like that? Well, the answer is we don't. We've just read Genesis, and it gives the dimensions, it doesn't give anything else in the sacred text. Now, God gave Noah the blueprints. He just had to build it. He didn't have to design it. God did that bit, okay? But we don't know that because it wasn't recorded. The point of these kind of features is not to show that it definitely looked like that, it's to show that that's a possibility. Next slide. That's it from the front. It's pretty big. It has this sort of bit sticking on which is going to catch the wind and turn it into the wind. Next slide. So that's it from above. You notice it's a whole theme park they made called Ark Encounter. What a great idea. We don't have anything like that over here, and I dare say probably the government would shut it down or something. Who knows? Yeah, we're a lot less tolerant of that kind of thing over here. Remember there was one Chick-fil-A in Reading that basically got shut down. It's a shame, like Chick-fil-A is quite nice. And if you tell them it's your first time going there, they let you have it for free. So if you're ever in America, remember that. Right. This is going to turn it into the wind, and then the idea is it has these vents, so the wind is going to run the length of the ark and ventilate it. Now, was it like, maybe not, but the point is it's a possibility, and you'll always get critics who say, oh yes, you couldn't ventilate it, or you couldn't, it wouldn't be big enough, or it wouldn't be stable enough. I haven't got a picture, but Kent Hovind suggests you have a thing called a moon pool, which is where you have a hole in the bottom, a big old hole, but with walls up the sides, so that the water, it's like having a well in the bottom of your ship, with the walls keep the water in there. And of course, as you go over the waves, the level of water in that is going to go up and down, which is going to do two things. It will relieve stress on the actual structure, but it will also act as a giant piston, pushing air and sucking it in and pushing it out of the ship. But yeah, okay, anyway, next slide. This is just the interior of Ken Ham's Ark in Kentucky, and you go into it and you go around it, and it's like a whole museum. Different rooms, different exhibits, including, they've actually gone to some effort to try and include possibilities of animals that went extinct that would have been included on the Ark. Now, they even go so far as to say there might be extinct animals that we don't even know about now because they've gone extinct a while back. But yeah, and also exhibits about what it would have been like on the Ark and then how the practicalities of how that's going to work out. Okay, next slide. That's from their own website, arkencounter.com. Just giving you an idea of the scale. 510 feet, they're using a royal cubit for that, but they're not using the biggest royal cubit, they're using the smallest one. I think that's reasonable, but anyway, next slide. Okay, this is from Dr. Jason Lyle, who also gives a talk on it. Anything, again, go away and have a look at this, please do, in your own time. Anything by Dr. Jason Lyle is usually pretty good. Yeah. So he gives the absolute minimum possibility for the size of the ark based on the cubits given in Genesis, and it ends up being basically 1.4 cubic foot, which is just under 14, just under 14,000 tons of gross tonnage, which I think is the displacement of the water, isn't it? Or the equivalent of 522 railroad stock cars of capacity. 125,280 sheep-sized animals. Here's an interesting fact. Those little cartoony arks with the elephants and the giraffes and everything, most of the animals in the world are nowhere near that big. If you sort of lined them up in order of size, the median one would be, I think, the size of a small dog. Most animals that exist are very small. Sorry, let me back up and say most animals that exist on the land. Most animals are in fact in the sea. So it's already a minority of the ones that are on the land breathing air, and of them, so walking animals, of them, they're all actually fairly small. The other thing is, of course, do you need to take fully grown animals? Particularly when you think of elephants, giraffes, dinosaurs, and there were dinosaurs on the ark, do you need fully grown ones? think the answer is no. You either have babies or you have juveniles, for a number of reasons which we will get to. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how many had to go onto the ark? This is again Dr. Jason Lyle's talk. The link is there. I'm not going to play it because again we just won't have time to get through everything. All of those are different types of dog, and there's many more different breeds of dog. We know where most breeds of dog came from. We created them in the last few hundred years. Golden retrievers, for instance, didn't exist 200 years ago. Pugs didn't used to have the flaps of skin because the nose isn't long enough. They're man-made breeds. Most breeds of dog are man-made breeds, and they have an ancient ancestor which was a dog. So Noah didn't have to take 2 Dalmatians and 2 golden retrievers and 2 border collies. He just had to take 2 dogs. The genetic variation within the gene pool, you have all of that variation just within those 2 dogs. Yes? And all of those breeds are descended from them. Okay, next slide. Same thing with dinosaurs. You don't need to take 2 Triceratops and 2 Torosaurus. You can just take 2 of the Ceratopsia family. They're probably the same kind. They're probably just variations within the same kind of animal. Next slide. Okay. So 2 of each kind, not of each species. By the way, this is Jason Lyle's calculation is just under 16,000, and he says that's being generous to the critics, so it may even have been less than that. That's allowing for extinct animals. That's allowing for where exactly you split a species or a kind. Nobody's quite sure. And we don't need to be sure, but okay, let's be generous to the critics. It's still not going to be anything like more than 16,000 in total. Species, if you ever get in an argument with an evolutionist about Noah's Ark and the different animals that have to go on it, they're going to play games with your mind about this. Oh, 2 of each kind, 2 of each sort. We read that in Genesis, 2 of each sort. Well, what's a sort, they'll say? I don't know, 2 of each sort. 2 dogs, 2 cats. Yeah. Probably not 2 lions and tigers. They're all domestic cats. Someone was saying the other day who had a cat, a friend of mine, that it's like having a little pocket tiger. It's smaller, but other than that, it's exactly the same thing. It's the same as a panther or a tiger or you name it. They're all the same. They're cats. And yeah, they're smaller, okay. I mean, ponies are smaller than cart horses, aren't they? Chihuahuas are smaller than Great Danes, but they're both dogs. Yes? And the horse, the donkey, the zebra, the pony are all horse kind. Scripture says again and again, it says it several times, they bring forth after their own kind. So one of the tests is that they can actually have children. Well, all 4 of those horse kind can. Okay, you can get a cross between all different combinations, right? A zonkey, for instance, is a cross between a horse and a donkey. One parent was a horse, one was a donkey. A zioni is a zebra and a pony, yes?
But then their children can't have children.
A shebra, no, because you're at the extreme end of the different ends of the gene pool. Their children can't have children. That's true. A mule, for instance, yeah. Their children can't have children, but they can breed with each other, which I think means way back up the chain they were originally, yeah. Same thing with, I think I mentioned last time, rabbits. You have Florida rabbits and Alaska rabbits. They actually can't breed with each other. They can't have children. They're both rabbits. And they can both breed with Minnesota rabbits, which is halfway in between the 2. Yeah, so they probably came from the original same animals. They're part of the same gene pool because of the drift. They've kind of gone their separate ways a little bit. Right, so there we go. Yeah, that's it. Now, oh look at that, Bill. There was a debate. It's worth watching it on YouTube. Like I say, Ken Ham is not as hard hitting as Kent Hovind. Kent Hovind is the best for all his little jokes and mannerisms and everything, and just making them look foolish. Ken Ham is very gentlemanly and very, very benign and so on, but he debated this absolute buffoon, Bill Nye, who bills himself as the science guy, not television personality or something. Oh, and by the way, he always wears a bow tie. Have you ever noticed that? Well, that proves how scientific he is. Look at his bow tie. Says Bill Nye the Science Guy. Does anybody know what his qualifications are?
Engineering.
Yeah, he has a bachelor's in engineering. I would imagine everybody in this room knows at least one person who is more qualified than he is when it comes to, origins and evolution and geology and so on, right? He's just a TV personality, that's all he is. And he says, how many animals had to go on the ark? Oh, there's 16 million species in the world today. Really? How do you arrive at that number? And I mean, other people have pointed, oh, there's 4 million, there's 9 million, there's 10 million, 60, 20 million, 80 million species in the world today. You go, well, you're kind of pulling numbers out of a hat at that point. But notice that it's species. That means, what does species, it literally, species in Latin mean? What does species mean?
Like appearance?
Yeah, it means how it looks, right? And it is related to any compound of the verb specto or spicio. It just means eyeballing it. That's literally what that means. It looks different. That's what a different species means. Okay? And that includes marine life, and that includes bacteria. Loads of those are just bacteria. So Noah needed to worry about getting all the right bacteria onto the ark, did he? And all the fish and all the whales and whatever. Right. So I mean, it's just silly. Next slide. Is it worth? Yeah. Okay. We argue that number of species on Earth today is 5 million plus or minus 3 million, of which 1.5 million are named. This is about 10 years ago. Costello, May and Stork in the journal Science, January 2013. I don't know what happened to the formatting on this. It's a bit difficult to read, but that's what that says there. Science journal. Notice they say the article was, can we name all the species before they go extinct? Plus or minus 3 million. So there's 5 million plus or minus 3 million. So there might be 2 million or there might be 8 million. So you have a 400% margin of error, is that right? It's not a very accurate guess, it's not a very precise guess anyway. That includes fish and marine life, it includes insects, it includes bacteria. Noah doesn't need to worry about any of those, and he doesn't need 2 of every species. He needs 2 of every kind. What's a kind? It means animals that can produce after their own kind, which is what Scripture says. Okay? The modern classification system, it would be the equivalent of the family in most cases, but the evolutionist will pick apart, oh, you can't define what a kind is. Well, you can't really define what a species is, first of all. It literally means what it looks like. And secondly, any way that you slice it, the current system of class and genus and phyla and all the rest of it is arbitrary. At the end, it's going to be man-made, isn't it? Technically, whales aren't fish because they're mammals. Well, okay. Yeah, according to your way of classifying them, because you've decided that what matters is whether it lays eggs or not. But why does that necessarily have to be the case? It swims in the water, doesn't it? It kind of looks like a fish, doesn't it? It has flippers and everything. So it's a fish. That's one argument, by the way, where they say, oh, there's contradictions in the Bible. It says Jonah was swallowed by a whale, and elsewhere it says he was swallowed by a fish. Oh, a whale isn't a fish. Well, in your classification system, maybe it's not, but a whale's a fish, okay? In the Bible's classification system, a whale is a fish. There's all these different animals. You're just drawing lines on a grid and putting them into different pigeonholes, but that's you deciding that, and it is kind of arbitrary. Does that sort of make sense, yes? All right, on we go. This is from a chap, I don't know if you can see at the bottom here, it's actually a YouTube video. There's so many, there's a veritable industry of cringe atheists, let me prove the Bible wrong. This is one of these guys, Ken Ham, 1,000 lies to defend the truth. And so he reproduced this 18th century encyclopedia Noah's Ark, and then to scale animals that, oh, they couldn't possibly fit on Noah's Ark at the back. Can anybody see a problem with that? Have a good old look. Anybody spotted it yet?
There's a lot of dinosaurs there.
There are a lot of dinosaurs. In fairness, the dinosaurs would have had to go on there, although only 2 of each kind.
The whale.
Oh, there's a sperm whale. Oh look, there's also a blue whale. Does he need to take whales on the ark? I kind of thought there was a lot of water outside the ark for them to swim in. What would be the biggest? Because he's in this mentality of whales are mammals, they're not fish. But why does that mean he needs to take them on the ark? They can swim in the water, can't they? And also, yeah, the dinosaurs, do they need to be fully grown? And some of these might be the same kind, and they might not be, I don't know, but I mean, they might be a Brachiosaurus, a Diplodocus, so they kind of look similar. I don't know. Anyway, all right, on we go. So, I said he's going to take small animals, juveniles or babies on the ark, And it's not something really that it's worth getting tied down into exactly how old were they. Well, apart from anything else, different animals have different lifespans. One of these guys, Jason Lyle, I think, or even Ken Ham, I think in his debate with Bill Nye, he says maybe they could take chickens, and then some chickens lay an egg a day or more. They could have taken a few different chickens, and that would have provided them food. And then the chap responds, "Oh, I thought you said you only took babies." Well, yeah, but the lifespan of a chicken is like, what, a year or two, maybe? And it goes from a chick to fully grown in less than a year, in, I don't know, 6 months. Have I got that right? Something like that? They don't live to a grand old age anyway, do they, chickens? They definitely don't. And I think the bigger the animal is, generally the older it lives, basically, yes? Okay, so you take juveniles or babies. Why? They take up less space, they eat less food, they produce less waste, they're more resilient and durable, and they have longer to reproduce when they get off the ark. The whole point of them being taken onto the ark is so they can live and repopulate afterwards. So you wouldn't take fully grown, senior citizens on the ark with you anyway. That's the whole point. You're going to take babies. And generally speaking, when animals know instinctually that there's a crisis going on, and they're put inside the dark somewhere in a cave, or in this case in the ark, they just go to sleep rather than don't they? So they're going to sleep most of the time, means you're not going to be bothered with them, you don't have to look after them. They're babies anyway, they don't eat a lot, they don't produce a lot of waste, and then they just stay in the dark asleep. They'll hibernate through the flood, and then you can come out later on, and they've got all their life ahead of them still to repopulate the earth. Yes? Okay. Alright. And that's the too many animals, not enough space argument. The next argument is that ships that big would break apart, and Bill Nye, the science guy with his bow tie, makes this argument. This is the exact argument he makes, and a lot of other people have taken it up after him. So let's have a little look at that. This is Bill Nye's video. In fact, how are we doing for time? 3:30. I suppose we could always break this up. Have a break halfway through. Yeah, or no, let's not. I was going to open the video and we can actually hear him saying this, but I have got the text on screen as well. He's talking about a ship called the Wyoming, which is one of the last ever sailing ships, really. They had a steam-powered winch for raising and lowering the sails, but it was a sailing ship, it wasn't powered by steam. Early 20th century. And he says it broke up in the seas. And that's just to scale the Titanic Queen Mary 2, and there's Ken Ham's Noah's Ark, the 510-foot one. And he says, 14 crewmen for the Wyoming, biggest actual wooden ship, built by skilled shipwrights, twisted apart in heavy seas. And it did, it sank with all hands. Noah's Ark, 14,000 passengers, built by unskilled family, ran aground safely on a mountain, ? All right, well, superficially, that's a very plausible argument. Why wouldn't Noah's Ark have just broken up like the Wyoming did? It was built by these guys who weren't shipbuilders. Next slide. So this is what he says. People in the early 1900s built an extraordinary large wooden ship, the Wyoming. It was not as big as the Titanic, but it was a very long ship. It would twist in the sea this way, and this way. Could not keep the ship dry, eventually foundered and sank, loss of all 14 hands. And then he says, these guys were the best in the world at wooden shipbuilding. And they couldn't build a boat as big as the Ark is claimed to have been. Is that reasonable? Is that possible? The very best shipwrights in the world couldn't do what 8 unskilled people did. Right, next slide. Here we go. So I had a look at the Wyoming, and guess what? There it is, that's a picture of it. And this is Wikipedia again, so we're using hostile sources. It's not a creationist website, Wikipedia. Wyoming was an American wooden 6-masted schooner built and completed in 1909. Because of her extreme length and wooden construction, Wyoming tended to flex in heavy seas. In March 1924, she foundered and sank in heavy seas with the loss of all hands. So he forgot to mention that it was plying its trade up and down the east coast of North America for December 1909, I think it was finally finished. So let's say 14 and a bit years. Okay? Noah's Ark has to survive how long? Less than 1 year. Okay? Also, I looked up the dimensions. The length is 450 foot. The breadth is only 50 foot. That's not a 6-to-1 ratio. That is a 9-to-1 ratio. Okay? here again are the dimensions of the ark. 300 cubits means 450 foot by 75 foot. So obviously the longer and thinner it is, the less structurally sound the more it's going to be at the mercy of those pressures. Yeah. Also, the ark had no masts. I know it's obvious when you think about it, but where does a lot of that pressure come from? It's the wind is exerting on the sails, and that's transferring through the masts, and that's pulling the ship along. So no masts, no rigging, no sails. It's a giant floating barge. That means it's not going to be under the stresses of a sailing boat. It doesn't have anywhere to go to anyway. So it doesn't have to travel through the water. It just has to stay afloat on top of it. Okay? Next slide. Okay. The animals would eat each other. That's an interesting argument. I mean, number one, if they're babies and they're asleep most of the time, no, I don't think they would. But anyway, let's go on. God said, behold, this is Genesis 1, I have given you every herb bearing seed upon the earth. He's talking to Adam. And all trees that have in themselves seed of their own kind to be your meat, and to all beasts of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to all that move upon the earth, and wherein there is life, that they may have to feed upon, and so it was done. Now, meat eating means you die, you kill, yeah? You eat the carcass of something that died. It's very clear, death is a consequence of original sin, right? Initially there was no original sin. I think therefore, it's reasonable to say, animals originally weren't meat eating, and nor were we. And God says here, and he says, I've given you all of these different trees and herbs and seed to be your meat. In other words, that's what you're going to eat. Okay? And I've given them to all the beasts of the earth as well, and to all the fowl of the air. So you, Adam and Eve, human beings, animals, birds, are all going to eat these plants. That's what they're there for. So would the animals eat each other? The answer is no, they're vegetarians. They were in those days. Right, let's go on. This is from Genesis chapter 9, at the end of the flood. God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, increase and multiply and fill the earth, and let the fear and dread of you be upon all the beasts of the earth. So they get off the ark, right, off you go everybody, repopulate the earth. The animals from now on are going to be afraid of you. With the odd exceptions, such as St. Francis of Assisi, that's been the case ever since. Okay. One argument is, well, look at their teeth. Why would they be made with these sharp teeth if they're only going to be vegetarians? Does anybody know what animal that is a skull of? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
Dog, maybe?
Not a dog, no. It's not a dinosaur, no. Next slide. It's a fruit bat. What do fruit bats eat? Not a trick question. They eat fruit. Those are three. This just gives you an idea once you see the scale of it. Yes, it's small. But think about it. Lots of fruit have a hard outer shell or casing, don't they? We have hands and we use knives and stuff. Think of a watermelon. Now, a watermelon is pretty soft. Of all the fruits, probably the softest. It has a pretty hard outer shell. Animals can't pick up a knife and fork, so they need teeth to get things like coconut, all of that kind of thing. They need teeth to bite through it. The fact that they have teeth really doesn't prove anything at all. They can be vegetarian and have teeth. Next slide. This is a famous example of a lion in the 20th century. Reader's Digest 1968. Little Tyke is the name of this lioness born in the zoo of Tacoma, Washington. Nursed for a broken leg, she became a rancher's house pet, enjoying perfume flowers for her own bed, a diet of milk and cereal. She never touches meat, which may account for the complacency of her kitten friend. They could let all sorts of animals into the same pen and completely unworried about it, because not only did this lion refuse to eat meat, you can see there, this is from, they were trying to offer it meat and it would just turn its head away in disgust. They did everything, they practically tried to force meat on it and it would not eat meat. It ate cereal, it had milk when it was little. Such a thing, I think, is possible. And it's the mistake of thinking that because the way things are, the way we see them now, that's how they've always been. What you call uniformitarianism. But it's fallacious thinking if you think about it. Panda bears. We're always told, oh, they're really fussy eaters, they only eat this certain kind of bamboo. Yeah, now, but I'm told, maybe this is wrong, a panda bear, if you actually throw it some meat, very often they will eat it. They're just too lazy to go and get it themselves. And like with us, people become fussy eaters over time. Once they get used to a very, very specific diet, over time it's difficult to go back. But probably originally they were meat eaters. And the fact is, in any case, panda bears, polar bears, brown bears, black bears, they're all bears, and they all probably had an ancestor which was a pair of bears that Noah took on the ark, and all the other bears are descended from them. You get different colours, but I mean, okay, has anybody seen a family of 12 children? Same two parents? You get all kinds of varieties from those two parents, right? God put a lot of diversity into the gene pool. Yep. Okay, here we go. This is a really stupid argument if you think about it, but I have actually heard it being used. Unfortunately, I had a good old look and I couldn't find it again. This was a few years ago I came across it. God said, you'll remember, pitch the ark within and without. So he doesn't just build it of wood, he kind of tars it over to keep the water out. Oh, pitch didn't exist back then because pitch is tar, it's a byproduct of the petrochemical industry, right? The petroleum industry, the fractional distillation of crude oil. Well, if you think about it, how long have we had sailing ships? In Nelson's day, there was no petroleum industry. They managed to pitch the ships somehow, didn't they? So that can't possibly. Sorry?
They pitched the rigging.
They
It used to
pitched
melt
the rigging,
when it got
right?
really hot.
So the answer is there's another way of making pitch. Now we probably get it through the byproduct of the petrochemical industry, but in those days we got it through, I think, sap from trees. Next slide. Okay, go on. There we go. So this is what it looks like in practice. If you go and look at these survivalist, survive in the wild videos on YouTube, and it is interesting, everybody loves a good survive off-grid video on YouTube. One of the things you can learn how to do is get sap out of trees, which you can use for pitch. There's different ways of doing it. I think that's called girdling a tree. But you can't, but essentially you knock a hole in it and you hang a pail underneath, and it kind of runs out. Sometimes they put a little kind of tube thing in for it to run out into the... This is jolly useful. It's so thick and sticky, but what you do is you then take that metal bucket and put it on top of a fire and heat it up, and it'll become to the point where you can paint it onto something. And of course, after the sap has all run out, you've already helped season the wood a bit, so you can chop that tree down and it will season a lot quicker. You can use it for firewood not long after that. Yeah. Okay, anyway, on we go. So, this is just, I forget what encyclopedia I found this in. For at least 1,000 years, the pitch-making industry in Europe flourished. It was the pitch of this industry which assisted in the construction of those great wooden sailing ships, which figured so prominently in European history. Pitch-making was a skilled trade, and many European surnames bear testimony to that fact today. In Polish, the word for pitch or tar is smola. Any Polish telephone directory displays names such as Smola, Smolander, Smolen, Smolenski and Smolarz. These surnames simply mean the man who makes pitch. Likewise, in Germany, the word for pitch is Teer, and it appears in names such as Teer and Teerman. Even the English have families whose name is Pitcher, Tarrier or Tarman, to mention but a few. These all indicate that the trade of manufacturing pitch was extremely common throughout Europe, and probably only really came to an end when metal ships replaced wooden ships, which would be less than 150 years ago. Right, on we go. So, that's Noah's Ark. I have rushed through bits of it. There's a lot more. If you're not convinced by anything or you want to see more evidence for yourself, I can only encourage you to go and delve deeper. I've tried to give you a little sampling of what there is, and then a different way of seeing things. Dinosaurs, we can get to. This is probably the last. We've probably done about 2/3, and dinosaurs is the remaining 1/3. I think maybe it's now 3:45. Should we break early? And then when we come back, we'll finish dinosaurs, and then we'll get on to part 2B as well. Is that worth doing?
Yeah.
Okay, because I think I need a bit of a break, I'm sure some of you do. If we say, what do you reckon, 15 minutes? Is that okay?
Yes, I'll do.
15, I think 15 is good, yeah. Okay, so it's now quarter to 4. If we come back at 4 o'clock, we'll carry on with dinosaurs. Alright? Jolly good, thank you very much.